visiting. Oh, very good. Is visiting here today, and he's coming with his PhD students as well.
Alvaro, yeah.
It's important to bear in mind that Miguel and Alvaro, they are at IDAEA, which is just across the road. You just cross the park,
Yeah.
and in front of Nexus 2, there is this institute, IDAEA. So it will be very easy to keep talking and discussing with both of them if you're interested.
Yeah.
And that's it. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, actually, I think it took me less than 5 minutes walking. So you're welcome anytime. I'm in the Nexus building, which is super, super close. So my door will be open anytime. Today, I'm here to talk to you about a global environmental challenge that the term we use for it now is freshwater salinization. And maybe for those of you that live in Catalonia, you might know this picture. Sorry, I'm gonna accept this so and close it. Yeah. Maybe you know this. This is the mountain made of salt, sodium chloride, basically the salt that you use at home. Is close to the Llobregat River, very, very close to it. It's in Sallent. It's in the north of Catalonia. So you can see it by the road. If you're driving, you will see a wide, big mountain. This is how I get interested into the topic, because I thought, okay, we have a mountain of salt close to a river, which is fresh water. What's going on here? So before I get into that, I just wanted to introduce myself. Okay, I will do it like this. Is it working? Okay, now. I'm an aquatic ecologist. So I work in freshwater ecosystems, from lakes in the mountains, like in the Picos de Europa, which is in the north of Spain, to lakes in Iceland. Also, I work in Mediterranean streams, also in desert streams in the US. I've been working. I also work in estuaries, coastal ecosystems like the Llobregat Delta that's here in Catalonia, but also now we are working in the Gambia estuary in Africa. And now I'm also doing some research in islands, in small streams in islands, such in the Canary Islands. So basically, I study the biodiversity of these systems of lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands, and how humans are impacting these ecosystems. So going back to freshwater salinization, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that rivers, lakes, freshwater ecosystems, they are not distilled water. They have some salts in it, all of them. And when I talk about salts, I'm talking about ions, dissolved ions. So calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, chloride, sulfate, carbonate, right? And just this is a diagram of the salt concentration of different systems, natural systems in the world. So you can see that there is a range of the total dissolved salts in these systems. So there are some places like the Orinoco that they have a low concentration of salts. But if you go to the US, to the Arizona, you find places like the Pecos River that they have a high salt concentration. And then some of them, this is the ratio in the x-axis, you have the ratio between the sodium and then the sum of the sodium and calcium. This means that the sodium is mainly coming from seawater influence in some of these rocks that also had places where the sea was present in the ancient times. And carbonate is mostly related with some rocks, carbonate rocks. So this also tells you about the origin of the salts. And as you can see, there is a difference. Oh wait, I meet someone. You can do that. Okay. So as you can see, that also the concentration of ions, it varies between sites. Some of the sites you have a lot of marine influence, and most of the ions are sodium chloride, and some of them, like the Columbia or the Yukon or Volga, these rivers, they are mostly influenced by rock weathering. So there are different processes that originate these salts. And this is what we call these processes that originate the salts that are into rivers and lakes and so on, is what we call the natural salt cycle. So which kind of processes are we talking about? For example, the erosion and the chemical weathering of the rocks, right? The rain is washing the rocks and is dissolving the salts that then go into the rivers. You also have like atmospheric transport. The salts are transported from the ocean into the land by clouds. You also have seawater intrusion, like the seawater is coming into the land. These are the kind of processes that naturally shape the salt concentration and ion concentration in rivers and streams and lakes. But what is happening now is that we are modifying this salt cycle and we have entered into the anthropogenic salt cycle. So here in orange, you have all different mechanisms that are altering the salt concentration of freshwater ecosystems. For example, acid rain, fertilizer use, increased ion exchange in the soils, sea level rise, so increased seawater intrusion, road dust. There are so many things, so as you can see, I'm not going to go into all of them, but as you can see, we are modifying this cycle. So now the salinity of these freshwater ecosystems is increasing. And this is happening worldwide. This is how a salinized river looks like. It's quite extreme. I mean, not all of them look like this, but you can see this white thing is salt crusts. And basically humans are altering the ion concentration of rivers, streams, freshwater ecosystems all around the world. This is the first take-home message. That this is happening, and this is happening at a global scale. But even if it has been happening for a long time, it was not recognized as an environmental problem until quite recently. And I would say maybe one of the fathers of this environmental issue is Williams. Oh, what was the name? I'm sorry, the name went out. So he was one of Australian researcher. He started looking into saline lakes, natural saline lakes, but then he found out that this salinization was very severe in Australia, and it was basically because in Australia, what the groundwater in many regions of Australia is saline, naturally saline, because of the type of rocks that they have. So they were clearing the land, they were removing trees and replacing it by pasture, low vegetation. So this means that you have more concentration of water into the soil, and then the groundwater tables were rising up, and they were bringing all the salts to the surface, into the surface, and there was a salt accumulation and a huge salinization problem. For example, into one of the biggest rivers in Australia, which is the Murray-Darling Basin. So William was arguing that this was a huge issue, but not only for Australia. He claimed that maybe 25 of the whole freshwater ecosystems in the world could be salinized. But still, this was like in the 90s. He has this paper in 2001 that is really, really good. It's like a review of the process for Australia. And he argued that this could be a global issue, but many people really didn't listen. Like most of the people thought that this was something that was happening only in Australia and maybe in some very arid regions of the world. But then during the next decade, during the next decades, there was a bloom in scientific papers, and there were evidences of salinization coming from road salt in the US. There were evidences of salinization of wetlands, rivers, lakes, and more and more and more. And I would say, like, during the last 10 years, we had a very, very prolific literature, and we have a lot of papers in journals like Science, Nature, proving that this is an environmental issue, very, very severe and global. So I will describe some of the main causes of salinization. One of them is resource extraction. So we have a very good example in Catalonia with the potash mining. So we are in the north of Catalonia, we are extracting potash that is used for fertilizers, mainly fertilizers. But then there is a lot of sodium chloride also. When you do the potash extraction, there is a lot of sodium chloride that is not that interesting because the market is already saturated. There is so many sodium chloride that is not very profitable. So what they are doing is that they are stockpiling the sodium chloride in the open air. And they have these huge mountains. So you have humidity every day, every night. And this humidity is dissolving these salts. And then you have heavy rains and rain events. They are dissolving these salts. And below this mountain, there's nothing. So it's also percolating into the groundwater. And these are pictures of one of the small streams near the mine. You can see there is no vegetation. You can see the salt crust. The trees are burned. And the salinity here is 3 times higher than the salinity of seawater. They tried to do something about it, so they built a collector. That is, they are putting the water into this reservoir, and then it goes into a pipe all the way into the ocean. But it's like 30-something kilometers long. The first problem is that the salinity is super corrosive. So the pipe is leaching, it's breaking, and you have like salt spills everywhere. And then, of course, they are only able to collect part of the water, but a lot of the water is still going into the ground and then into the streams. So this is a big issue, not only in Catalonia, but you have it in Germany, Canada, South America. So potash extraction is a big issue. But you also have fracking, oil extraction, gas extraction. How do you extract oil? So basically you inject water, right? You inject water into the ground and you apply a lot of pressure and the oil comes out. So this water, it has a very high pressure and it goes very deep. So it gets super warm. So, and it's dissolving all the salts that are in the ground. So in the end, what you have is a water that is near the boiling point. It's like maybe 120 degrees temperature. And it's crazy. The amount of salts is crazy, several times higher than the seawater. And these waters are then many times dumped into rivers and streams. In the Amazon, they were dumping, it was like millions of liters every day into the Amazon River, which is one of the hotspots of biodiversity in the world. And we found that in one of the catchments, it was a small catchment. It represents less than the 1% of the river. So a very small river was contributing 20% of the whole sodium export of the whole chloride export of the Amazon into the ocean. So a very tiny portion of the Amazon, because of the oil extraction activity, was putting a lot of chloride into the Amazon River. And then another main driver is agriculture, irrigation agriculture. So the water that we use for agriculture, for irrigation, has some salts in it. This water, many times we are applying more water into the crops than the water that they can absorb. So you have water that is remaining in the soil. And this water evaporates, especially here in the Mediterranean, in the Irish region, there is a high evaporation rate. So the water evaporates, but the salts stay there. And they build up and build up and build up. And only 1,000 millimeters of irrigation water can add up to 300 kilograms of salts every year into the soil. And then, of course, these salts go into the rivers and the streams. And irrigation agriculture is happening everywhere in the world, like many places in the world. This is just a paper that they published in Nature Communications recently, when they analyzed different catchments in the world. You have the Ebro, for example. You can see when it's yellow or red, it means that it's salinized. So you can see that a lot of the Ebro delta, of the Ebro catchment, sorry, is salinized. And they analyzed the importance of different drivers, like the distance to the coast or the soil humidity. And they found that the irrigation area was by far the most important driver of salinization. Another driver is of salinization is road salt. In the cold regions of the world, for example, in Canada, in Norway, Finland, in the Alps, they use a lot of, well, in Spain we do too, I mean, everywhere. They use a lot of salt to prevent ice and so and keep driving safety. You have some numbers here. In Europe, up to 17 million tons of salt every year applied to the roads. In Spain, for this period, in the winter of 21-22, we applied like 100 thousand tons. And here you have an example of a stream. This was before the road was built. Here you have the electrical conductivity, which is a measure of the salinity. And after the road was built, it went rocket high. And this is one of the streams in the north of the US, where they have very, very cold winters. And of course, you can imagine if the salt is in a road, the road is not absorbing this salt. The salt will eventually go into the streams and lakes with the rain when it's washed. So, okay, I hope I convinced you already that this is happening at the worldwide scale, but then you could argue, so what? What's the problem with having a little bit of salt into a river or a lake, or who cares about it? Like, I don't know. It's a good question. So for that, first, we need to set the context is that we are in a global biodiversity crisis, freshwater biodiversity crisis. I don't know if you know about this, but there is something called the Living Planet Index. So in the 1970, we kind of did an inventory of all the freshwater species that we had in the world. And then every year we are tracking how many of them disappear, go extinct. And this is what you see. So 85% of them have disappeared away. So we are in a very, very dramatic situation, also because for some of these species, we don't really know what they do. So they are disappearing, but we don't know the role they play in the ecosystem. So it might have unexpected consequences for us. And within this context, this is what happens to freshwater biodiversity when you add salt. This is the salt concentration, and this is the total number of species. So if you add a little bit of salt, it's fine. Doesn't seem to matter that much, but then there is a tipping point. And when you reach that tipping point, there is a very drastic decline in the number of species. And what is happening here in the graphic below, you have that there is a replacement. So you are losing the freshwater species. And the only thing that is left are the allophile species, the few species that are able to tolerate this high salinity. And this is happening because there is something called osmoregulation. And it applies to all animals, also us. We need, all the animals, they need to maintain a balance between the ion concentration within their bodies and within their cells. And the animals that live in a water environment, they need to maintain an osmotic pressure between their bodies and the amount of salts of ions that is in the water. And to do that, they use something that is called osmoregulation. So there are different ion pumps that are used to excrete ions from your body. This is super costly in terms of energy. You need to spend a lot of energy to do this. So if the salinity is okay, there's no problem, and you can keep your energy for growth, reproduction, any respiration, any kind of function that we have. But if the salinity goes very high, then you need to spend a lot of energy into this. And you have very little energy for growth, for development, and for very basic functions. This is, for example, an experiment they did with a fish. This fish grew under natural conditions, and this one grew under salinization. And they have the same age. So you can see that the growth was considerably delayed. And this is an experiment we did in the mines in the Llobregat River. And this is these are different genes. We were looking at metagenomics and the genes that are expressed. And you can see that there are completely different genes being expressed in the fish that were in the freshwater and the ones that were in the salinized part of the river. And many of the genes that were activated were related with brain damage, oxidative stress, and things like that. So at some point, if the salt is too high, this osmoregulation breaks down and the cell dies and the organism dies. And then the other thing is that this is at the individual level, but the whole community can change, because if you have a salinized river, what you might have is that, for example, marine and estuarine fauna can colonize this place, and invasive species. So in the end, what you have is like a reorganization of the community, and you have a completely different community from the one that is expected and the natural conditions. And this can even lead to trophic cascade. And this is what happened 2 years ago in the other river. The other river flows through Poland and Germany. And we had a huge ecological disaster 2 years ago in a summer, very warm summer. The salinity was very high because of the mining around the catchment. And then there was an algae that really likes salty conditions. And there was warm temperature, high salinity, a lot of nutrients. So the algae was very happy. And this is a cyanobacteria that releases toxins. So all these toxins kill the fish, and there were tons and tons and tons of dead fish. And in fact, now the European Union is taking this salinization issue seriously because of this. So now the European Commission is really thinking about what can we do to tackle this issue. So it's very timely. This is about biodiversity, but then there are also economic costs. For example, this is the salinity of the streams that flow into Barcelona, the Llobregat. If it's red, it means that the salinity is very high, too high. So this is us, and these are the rivers that flow into us. So you can see that all of them are red or yellow, so they are super saline. And this is a problem because the water that we drink, if you drink saline water, first of all, it doesn't taste good. You don't like it. And second, it's not good for you. So they had to install a desalination plant. And it had a cost of around 130 million euros. And this was a long time ago. And the maintenance cost was estimated around 2 million per year. Now it's higher, obviously, because this was the first estimation. And we are paying for this. The other thing, like all of us, also the pipe that I showed you, the 30 kilometers pipe, we paid for it. The company didn't pay a single euro. This is all financed. In this case, there is some private funding, but in the case of the pipe, it was by the Catalonian Water Agency that is completely relying on taxpayers. And then you have another economic cost, like, for example, infrastructure, corrosion, the damage to crops. And these are just direct economic costs. But then you have a lot of indirect costs related with the loss of ecosystem services, for example. And these have never been estimated so far. And another thing to keep in mind are the human health risks. Right? For example, in Bangladesh, there was a big issue about salinity and preeclampsia for pregnant women. So here we can afford to have a desalination plant or inverse osmosis. This is very, very costly. But if you are in Bangladesh, in the coast of Bangladesh, that it's not available. So people is just drinking the water they have. In Bangladesh, they have a huge problem with seawater intrusion. You can see in red is the high salinity, and the salinity is affecting all of the coastal area of Bangladesh. And they found that there was a very high risk of preeclampsia. The preeclampsia is very dangerous. It can kill the mom, it can kill the baby, it can kill both of them. And it was directly associated with salinization, with a high sodium uptake in your body. But the health issues are not restricted to the, what you say, like the developing countries. In the US, there was a huge human health issue. This was because they were using these salts in the roads, and they went into the water infrastructure. And the water infrastructure was a bit old, so the salts were corroding the pipes, and they were leaching metals. and the people was drinking water with lead, which is very poisonous. And there have been a lot of studies of, for example, the kids exposed to this kind of water with brain damage, and there is even people in jail because of this. It was a big issue. They mobilized the National Guard. So the health issues need to be revised and are probably also happening worldwide. And everything can be maybe summarized into something like this. Like in the end, what happens in terms of socioeconomic costs, you need to think about, okay, what is the water being used for? And for each of these uses, you have a salinity limit. For example, if you have drinking water, there is a moment when this water it's not safe for drinking anymore. It's not palatable either. If you're gonna use it for irrigation, there is a moment when if the salt is too high, it's gonna kill the crops. It's going to damage the crops. If you use it for cattle, here in Catalonia, I talked to some people, their cows, their pigs, they were dying because they were drinking this water. So this is also an issue for cattle. And then some industrial processes. A lot of the water is used for industry. And if the salt is too high, it's going to damage the facilities and it's not going to be useful. And this is kind of a summary of everything. So you have different human activities like resource extraction, agriculture. We are estimating that maybe around 1/3 of all the freshwater ecosystems in the world could be salinized. And then you have effects on the organisms, the ecosystem, economic cost, and human health costs. So now, why I'm here and the question. These already we know about this. I mean, it could be improved. We need more studies and so on, but everything I've told you so far, we are pretty sure about it. It's fine. We know. Probably also we know what needs to be done, more or less. But there is a big, huge knowledge gap. And it's like, what we only have, this is a review paper. Okay, so the number refers to the number of studies that have been conducted in each of the regions. This is a recent review paper that took maybe a 5 years span or something. So you can see, and the different colors are different drivers of salinization. 93 studies in the US, 49 in Europe. So most of the studies are taking place in the US, in Europe. In Australia now the number is low, but it's mostly because they already did it in the past, not because it's not interesting, but they were the first to study this, so now it's not a hot topic anymore. But then Africa, South America, Asia, I mean, you have 19 studies, but it's huge. We're talking about a huge region. There are many places in Asia where we have no information, nothing. So it is very difficult to have the global picture. Okay, we know this is happening, but there are so many regions for which we have no information, and we need to know because we have many questions. We need to know first how many rivers and lakes and wetlands of the world are salinized. We have no estimates. Which are the areas that are at higher risk or more vulnerable to salinization. And then if we understand this, maybe we can also do some predictions into the future, because climate change is going to affect freshwater salinization. You can think, for example, in some places like the Mediterranean, we're going to have less water. This is going to reduce the flow of the rivers, the river flow. So this means a less dilution capacity. So the same amount of salt is going to be more concentrated. Then seawater intrusion, sea level rise is going to be an issue related with climate change. So freshwater salinization is going to be amplified in many regions of the world. But it's difficult to know exactly how this is going to happen if we don't have the information. So we have started dealing with this, and we are on a quest, I would say, data quest. Alvaro is responsible for this mainly, so maybe he could be taking questions too. We created this data set that we called GlobeSalt. GlobeSalt is taking information from 62 different data sources. The good thing is that salinity is routinely measured parameter in all biomonitoring water quality schemes around the world. It's something very easy to measure, and everyone is doing it. And they've been doing this for 50 years. Because it's like a proxy also to human impacts, and it's something that was measured traditionally. So the information is there. The other thing is that sometimes it's a chaos, like each government, each country has its different schemes, ways of measuring this, ways of reporting this. So Alvaro did an amazing job that trying to organize all of this, clean it, harmonize it, and then he merged it with HydroAtlas. HydroAtlas is a global river network. So everything now is into this network. All the salinity information is here. And this data set has also information on hydrology, geology, human influence, climate. So we not only have salinity, but we have a lot of associated variables. And then all of this was cleaned, processed, and we obtained this data set that looks more or less like this. We are talking about 10 million records, more than 50,000 sites. And this is just the mean conductivity. Here we have information for some ions like sodium, sulfate, potassium, sodium chloride. And you can see that still it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. There are many regions. So everything that is in gray, it means no data. I mean, some of the places, like for example, the north of Africa, there is nothing there because there are no rivers or streams or whatever. But in many places, it's just we don't have the data. But still, it's pretty good. Like for example, India is pretty well covered. Europe is very well covered. The United States super well covered. South America pretty well. Africa is still very challenging in Asia. But this is our starting point. And this is how it looks like in terms of temporal coverage. It spans, well, there are some maybe older data than this. No? We have some from the 70s and 60s maybe, but most of it is between the 80s and recent period. And also you can see the distribution of the data here is not even. For example, in Europe, what happened here? Why we have so many more data here than here? Is because we had something called the Water Framework Directive. It's a policy, it's a big policy in Europe about the target of this policy is to achieve the good ecological status for all rivers, streams, and lakes in Europe. So after that, everyone was measuring water quality in a much more consistent way. So we have more data. So the data is not balanced. And then we have this kind of roof. You can see here, like there is like an upper ceiling of the data. And this most likely has to do with the reporting of data. There is a moment when the salinity is too high that they simply do not enter the value into the data set. They just say above 30 or wherever, because they report it this way, and there is nothing we can do about it. So the data set has some limitations. And the other good thing is that we have this data set, but also during the last years, people have been publishing very valuable data sets, global data sets that could be useful to model salinity. For example, we have global data sets for land use and at very high resolution. You have global data sets for dams. This is the fragmentation of rivers by dams. So if it's red, it's highly fragmented. If it's blue, there is no fragmentation. You can see that there are maybe a few rivers in like the Amazon or some rivers in Africa that are not so fragmented, but in Europe and the US, it's crazy. This also can affect salinization. And so this information, we have it at a very high resolution. We have information on wastewater treatment plants. This is a global data set on wastewater treatment plants with over 50,000 wastewater treatment plants, not only the location, but also all the characteristics of the wastewater treatment plants. I don't know, hydrology. This is a global data set about the permanence of the water into the streams and the rivers. So it's telling you how many streams and rivers in the world are being dry at some point during the year. So if it's red, it means that is a temporary, it can dry. We already have these data sets. Like we are working on merging them into the one that we have compiled. And this might take some time. There's some data architecture behind that. And so I'm nearly finished. And after all of this, My question is, with this information, do you think that we can model freshwater salinization at the global scale? I know you've been doing some very nice work related with earth sciences and earth systems, climate systems. I mean, I know you have the technical skills to do it. I'm not an expert on that, but I believe that technically it's possible. I think the data that we have could be good enough to do this. So I would say the pros are this, like we have the data, you have the technical expertise, we have the knowledge, we know how the ecosystems work, we know how salinity, we have the mechanistic understanding of the salinization. The limitations is that the data is not balanced spatially and temporally, you've seen. Also, there might be some sampling and data reporting biases that we need to account for. And then the other big issue is that salinization interacts with many other things. So salinization, for example, if you have agriculture, okay, agriculture is causing salinization, but it's also causing nutrient pollution because you have fertilizers. So both are acting at the same time. And then you can add the climate. And then so you have so many variables and they are all interrelated in ways that you don't understand and you cannot anticipate. So I don't think we can build like a mechanistic model. We need to, we are thinking something more in the line of deep learning or something like that. So that's all. And I guess that the last question would be if anyone would like to help us. And if we think it's a pretty nice challenge. And we are just starting, we just compiled the data. There is so much work to do. We are thinking that we need to probably target some funding schemes, try to find some money to do this and have at least 3 people maybe involved here. We need data architecture, data analysis, then of course, someone with ecological knowledge. But it would be awesome if anyone will like to join us and help us. And all the ideas you might have, they will be super welcomed. And that's it. Just this is our team, and I want to thank them and also our international collaborators and Alvaro, who is here, that did the hard job of compiling the data set and working on it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Miguel. So questions here? Well, obviously Alvaro knows. Any questions?